13 locked up. Nova Roma Gate Room 9 November 2016, 15:59. Vale was in the gate room, or some place that looked like the gate room. He looked around the room and spotted a clock that shouldn't be there. It was mounted on one of the panels in the control room. The time appeared to be frozen at 15:59. "You left us behind," a male voice said. He turned to see Pavel Guskov standing there. The doctor was bleeding from a nasty cut on his forehead, but he did not notice, which was odd, because he had died of a broken neck. The man was also way too pale. Tilda like the dead man he is, Tilda. "There was no way to take the bodies along, doctor." "That's a lie," Guskov snapped. "You simply didn't care, take a couple sips of wine and move on." More of the dead entered the room. They were all wounded and bleeding. He spotted Mayra and Leighton amongst them. The crowd yelled at him, blaming him of their deaths. He backed away from them until he bumped into something. He turned and saw his father. "You disappointed me." His heart sank. He tried to say something, anything, but his body refused to cooperate. His father turned to mist and sank away through the floor. The crowd kept yelling at him. He put his hands over his ears and screamed. Planet 7, Warehouse 16, November 2016, 0417. Before waking up on a bunk, they had come out of the wormhole on Planet 7 as planned. The Stargate on this planet was on a plaza in the middle of the capital city. It had taken the local security force virtually no time to respond to their arrival. They had quickly surrounded the expedition. Fortunately, Gerhardt had also responded quickly. He had ordered all of them locked up in a warehouse at the edge of town. In the days since, they had managed to turn the place into a makeshift home. Vale sat up and sighed. The nightmares had begun the night after they had arrived, and there was more one. He threw his legs over the edge of the bed. There was a knock at the door. He got up and opened it. Dr. Porter was standing there. Her room was next to his. "Are you okay, Colonel?" "Yes, I'm having nightmares," she smiled at him. "Look, I understand if you don't want to talk about it. Come on in." He stepped aside and she walked into the room. Vale closed the door behind her. "Look, I would be lying if I said I totally fine. The ambush," he sighed. "I should have seen it coming." "How?" There was no way to know that some of the new Asuran tech had survived. She paused. I overheard what General O'Neill said to you before I came in, and he was right. The only people responsible for that happened are the Nakai. My mind knows that, but my heart," he shook his head. "I lost 70 people. We lost 70 people, Porter said. "We all knew what we were signing up for when we joined this mission, and that's true for both the military personnel and the civilians." She paused. "And, like General O'Neill said, the IOA authorized the jump. It was their call to move the mission forward." Vale was about to say something, but he realized that she was right. He gestured towards a small table with 2 chairs. His room had been a supply closet when they had gotten here. The new Asurans had apparently forgotten about this warehouse and the stuff inside. So they had made good use of those supplies as well, and those had included several bunks, some chairs, and a couple of tables. Porter sat down, while Vale sat across her. "You know, it's at moments like this that I miss my old job." "What exactly did you do in the Legions?" "Actually, I had just made Centurion when I was frozen." Vale leaned back. "But to answer your question, I took troops that were fresh out of training and kept them alive long enough to gather experience. 1, 2, sometimes 3 years. Then they would transfer to other units if I had not been. You know, I would have been busy whipping 72 soldiers into veterans." "What was it like? I mean, I know about the Empire from history books, but you actually lived it in." "Advanced and brutal at the same time." Vale paused. "I'm not going to pretend it was perfect. I did some pretty nasty stuff in the Legions. And no, you don't want to know the details. We had very different laws. There were social classes and slaves. It was a world as alien as anything you can find by means of the gate." "I see," she paused. So what happens now to the expedition, I mean? The new Asuran Senate is holding a vote today. Apparently, they are considering sending us back to Earth. They both knew what that meant. If the new Asurans made that call, it was all over, which is not making sleeping any easier. Well, I'm going to give it another shot. Good night, Colonel. Yeah, good idea. See you later. The two of them got up and headed for the door. The vote is at 0800, so we should know at 0805. I'll make an announcement after they tell me. Porter gave him a nod and left. Vale closed the door behind her, then went back to his bunk. This was going to a long, long night. Planet 1 New Asuran Senate, 16, November 2016. 0800. The Senate building was located in the middle of the capital city of Planet 1. It was one of the oldest buildings in the whole empire. And that meant it was not exactly the roomiest of places. The Senate chamber had a horseshoe table with 18 chairs. Each planet had one senator and a small stand for the public. The stand had filled in record time, and now the senators were filing in. They took their seats, and the chairman of the Senate entered. His name was Victor. He looked like a 60-year-old human with gray hair and brown eyes. Victor took a seat inside the horseshoe. We are here today to vote on returning the Tory to their homeworld, Earth. He began, so let us vote. Each senator had 3 buttons in front of him or her, a red one to present no, an orange one to abstain, and a green one for yes. They were connected to lights in front of them. Because he was the chairman, Victor did not get to vote, so he simply watched as all the green lights lit up. After the last vote was in, he stood up and looked at the stands. The Senate has voted, and it has been decided that today is the day we prove Oberoth right. Another voice said. There were hushed comments and exchanged glances. The source of the voice walked into the room. The voice belonged to a male Asuran who appeared like he was in his 30s, with brown hair that was cut short and brown eyes. He had Caucasian skin and a stubble like he had not shaved for 3 days. His name was Yorick, and he was the first new Asuran ever. Yorick had led the original rebellion back on the Asuran homeworld. He had been the chairman of the Senate until 100 years ago. Then he had vanished for the public eye. Since then, there had been stories and rumors. The fact that he was here meant that he was taking this vote extremely serious. During the rebellion, I had a conversation with Oberoth. He said we were fools and that we would never equal them or the ancients. Yorick began. And he was right. I have heard about the people from Earth and how their political leaders, the Iowa, are narrow-minded, bureaucratic, and xenophobic. And, as we have learned today, so are we. We came here to build a new, better civilization. He walked into the middle of the chamber and looked at the crowd. And we have failed. We like to judge the humans. We like to judge the ancients and the Asurans, but the truth is that we are just as selfish and arrogant. Oh yes, we can pat ourselves on the back for not killing the humans here. Bravo. His voice was dripping with sarcasm. Who cares that we are condemning the people aboard Destiny? Let's play it safe. After all, that's how we got here. That's how we got off Asuras. That's how we build this civilization. He looked at the senators, his eyes spitting contempt and fire. No, we have not stagnated as a race. We are colonizing planet after planet. The new Asurans had not settled a new planet in 300 years. We are making new, grand discoveries and figuring out more and more about the universe, about existence itself, every day. Congratulations, well done. And with that said, he marched out of the room. The second he was gone, the room erupted into chaotic shouting and discussion. Planet 7, Warehouse 16, November 2016, 1018. The whole expedition team was gathered in the biggest room in the warehouse. There was no news from the Senate yet. They had received a paper copy of Yorick's speech, along with a note that said the Senate was locked in a heated debate, and that the original vote had been declared invalid. There were also large crowds of protesters on the street, but nobody knew if these were people who in favor of sending them to Earth or against. So there was nothing for them to do except sit and wait. "This is ridiculous," Haley said. "They could be in debate for days." "That's politics for you," Aronov said. "The leaders waste time and the people suffer." "That's very Russian of you, Nikita." "I prefer to call it realistic, Jennifer," he smiled at her. "Now, does anybody have?" That was as far as he got before the sound of a door opening stopped him. "Never mind." A male Asuran walked into the room. He was wearing jeans and a white t-shirt. "Greetings, I am Yorick," he said. "And yes, I am that Yorick. I need to talk to Lieutenant Colonel Vale. The Senate has made a decision, but the situation is complicated." "That would be me," Vale said. "Can we talk somewhere in private?" "Of course," Vale said. "Please follow me." Vale led Yorick to his room. He had to admit that the founder of the new Asurans was not what he had expected. In his mind, Yorick had been an elderly fat man with a beard. They reached his room and he sat down at the table. Yorick sat across from him. Then he took a folder from under his arm. Vale had not even noticed he had it and opened it. Inside of it was what appeared to be a map of a part of Destiny's course. The map began at the Nakai home galaxy and ended at a galaxy marked Destiny Galaxy 2. "Did they tell you that I have not been out in public for 100 years?" "Yes, but nobody told me why. So..." "Well, that's why I wanted to talk to you, and why this situation is complicated." He paused. "You know that we tried to reach Destiny, and that our ships had to make stops along the way. You also know that the Nakai have been chasing that ship through galaxy after galaxy. Now our stops do not have any buildings. They were just places where we paused. The Nakai, however, need food, water, and air, and to guard and cultivate those resources. So the Nakai stops would have to be manned, because without these," he paused, "small colonies, it would be impossible to replace any ships lost during the chase, which means there would have to colonies all over this map." He pointed to the map. "So, that's what these blue dots are." There was a chain of blue dots on the map. Now, these colonies are old and far removed from Nakai home space and thus the central authority of their race. And this had made the Nakai living on these worlds different. They call Destiny the Destroyer. The Destroyer, really? Before that ship passed through their galaxy, the Nakai had a culture. But then they became obsessed with capturing that ship, its secrets and its technology. They lost such, and the Nakai on these colonies began to realize that. They feel that there is more to life than just chasing a billion-year-old ancient rust bucket. So they began exploring the galaxies they were in, running experiments and developing technology that had nothing to do with reaching Destiny, and creating things like poetry and paintings. And so much more, but the folks in home space, they did not appreciate this, did they? No, they did not, but the Nakai already knew about us, so they asked us for help. Yorick paused. "You see, there are 42 planets in this galaxy that are suitable for permanent inhabitation, after our terraforming program, that is, but only 18 of those had neutronium." Vale nodded in understanding. Neutronium was an element needed to make Asurans. They wanted to relocate to the other planets, and we, in our selfishness, said no. I was so furious that I stood down as chairman of the Senate and went into exile. The people demanded that the Senate stand down, which they did. But over time, the new senators became just as narrow-minded as the old. And how do the Ursini fit into this story? How did they know to ride to our rescue? He paused. And where did the Nakai motherships that backed up the upgraded one come from? Well, officially, we did not have any relations with the Nakai colonists. Off the record, however, I kept some back channels open between them and me, and I also kept some connections to our political leadership. But the key thing I did was arrange the building of an off-the-grid DSI network facility. You have a DSI facility? Yes, but the Senate does not know. He leaned forward. The official one was dismantled after we gave up on trying to dial the 9th chevron. Anyway, I used the telemetry as an early warning system. Because, like you said, the Nakai in home space were not happy with the colonists and their philosophy. They have tried 3 times to wipe them out. The first time, I sent the colonists coordinates to worlds where they could relocate. When the fleet arrived, they found only the original outposts. And they couldn't destroy those because they needed them for the chase. The second time, the home space fleet came in large numbers and tried to find the relocated colonists, but we provided them with cloaking technology. He paused. Attempt 3 is where the Ursini enter the picture. We had just discovered them, and their war with the Berserker drones was not going well. I managed to negotiate an alliance between the colonists and the Ursini. The Ursini needed a place to life that was out of range of the drones, while the Nakai needed reinforcements against the home space fleet. So the Ursini did not go extinct, they just left. Yes, they resettled on the Nakai worlds, Yorick began. Their ships were enough to make the home space fleet cancel their plans. The things is, we made the home space Nakai think that the Ursini had 10 times more ships than they actually have, and now they have caught on. So, they are going to try again. Yes, and soon. We're talking weeks here. Yorick scratched his face. That's what I meant when I said it was complicated. It's not just about Colonel Young's crew, Colonel Telford's team, or even your crew anymore. We're talking about 25 million Nakai and 13 million Ursini spread over 82 planets here. And they are going to get massacred unless we come up with a plan. Okay, no pressure. But they both knew that this was no going to be an easy task. 14, a crazy plan. Planet 7, Warehouse 25, November 2016, 14:12. Jennifer Haley sighed and looked at her laptop. She had been trying for a couple of days now to rewrite the program they had been planning to use to dial into Destiny. She had named it Destiny Alpha 1. Her intention was reprogram DA1. Instead of making Destiny believe their gate was on Earth, they had to make the system believe that Destiny had been destroyed. Once they did that, they should be able to dial the 9th chevron and end up aboard the Spira instead. At least, that was the theory. The practice, however, was turning out to be a major pain in the neck. Any luck, Carlson said. She was sitting in the same room where the whole group had waited for the 16th. With a little help from the Assurans, they had converted the place into a major lab. They had also tied it into the DSI facility. The Senate had not been happy when they had found out about it, but the people had supported Yorick. And so did the new Assuran fleet. So there was nothing they could do about the new direction the new Assurans were taking. Not without getting lynched, that was. No, Haley said, and we need this program to make it aboard Spira. The new Assurans had the gate addresses of all 82 colonist Ursini worlds and had done the math on how much power it would take to dial from them to the Hope Galaxy. But even if they made it to the colonist world that was the closest to Spira, they would need the override for the final hop. And that brought up another problem. They needed a power source to do their leapfrogging between the colonies. But the Destiny model Stargates could not handle the output from a ZPM, so they needed another power source to make this work. Yeah, he handed Haley a cup of coffee. The new Assurans are struggling with the power source as well. Got any ideas? She smiled. Don't let this go to your head, but you are the best engineer we have. At the moment, I'm also the only engineer we have. But thanks. He gestured towards the laptop. May I have a look? Go for it. Haley turned the laptop around and Carlson sat down at the table. He had barely begun when Aronov came in. The archaeologist looked exhausted. He had spent the later couple of days at the DSI facility digging through the telemetry archives. His intention had been to find more information about the race that had inhabited the moon they had explored with new Assurans. Alas, it was like trying to find a needle in a massive haystack. Well, looks like we're not the only ones having trouble. I can't find anything about whoever lived on that moon, Aronov said as he grabbed a chair and joined them at the table. I was hoping to find something useful about these aliens, but there is nothing. I know how you feel, Coulson said. The power source research is not going well either. It's not like power sources grow on trees. Grow, Aronov said. That's it, Wraith Tech. We use Wraith Tech. Coulson and Haley looked at him as if he had grown a second head. Punch up the schematics of the colonies. Okay, Coulson worked the laptop a bit, then turned it so that Haley and Aronov could see. What's the plan? Now, the Nakai were kinda cheap when they build these outposts. They didn't bother to terraform any of these planets, nor did they give the colonists the technology to terraform the planets themselves, so all these places are towns inside domes. He paused. We grow a shell around the dome, making sure it is airtight. Then all we have to do is add a hyperdrive, and we have a flying city. Let's presume that works, Haley said. We can't fly those cities through Nakai home space without them being destroyed or suffering major damage. Can't we? Atlantis once encountered a Wraith hive upgraded with 1 ZPM, and it was a monster. With more than 1 and little help from the new Assurans, we could grow what we need in record time. Aronov said. And then what? Wipe out the home space Nakai with a fleet of 82 city ships, Coulson said. How does that make us any better than the Nakai? No, Aronov opened the map with the locations of the colonist worlds. We know that the Berserker drones are native to the second galaxy Destiny, traveled through with our people aboard. Hence, Destiny Galaxy 2. But the last outpost on the list is in Destiny Galaxy 1. Now, we know that replacing a Destiny model gate with a Pegasus model gate and then getting it to work with the rest of network is a major pain. That's why replacing 82 Stargates is not a viable option, but if we can get all of them to one place. We'd only have to replace 1 gate, Coulson said. And if we tie together all the power of the city ships, they'd have more than enough power to dial back here. Not to mention, we'd have a chance to permanently break the chain. Break the chain, Haley said. Even if we empty these planets, the Nakai will simply resettle them. That will slow down their progress, but it won't stop their chase of destiny. Once all the colonists and Ursini are relocated to the Hope Galaxy, we use the ZPMs from the city ships to destroy as many planets as we can in Destiny Galaxy 1. Coulson paused. A ZPM on overload will destroy a whole solar system, and we would have 246 of them, allowing us to create a void. There would be no place to build a replacement settlement. The supply chain would be broken. As I see it, there are 2 problems with this plan, Aronov said. 1, Spira would probably have to cross this void itself, and 2, this plan does not deal with the Berserker drones. Remember, we have to cross Destiny Galaxy 2 as well. We don't need the city ships themselves to create the void, Grogan said. He had walked in while they had been talking and had overheard the conversation after the mention of Wraith technology. Just the ZPMs. We can use the city ships against the Berserker ships. Gather them all in one solar system, and they will make too tempting a target for the drones to ignore. And even without ZPMs, those ships should have enough firepower to make them call in all of their ships. So we leave 1 ZPM in place, lure them in, and then, boom. No more Berserker drones to worry about. And who do we get the crews off the ships before our trap closes? Haley said. Who says we need crews? Coulson said. We could automate the ships before we set the trap. So, Aronov began. Now that we have a plan, who is going to tell the colonel? This left them all looking at each other in uncomfortable silence. Stargate Command Briefing Room, 25 November 2016, 1930. The official IOA representatives had tried to push Anders and company out. Now that things were slowly coming together, they wanted to step in and claim the glory. But President Mackenzie was not going to let that fly, and he was not the only one to object. So when the president walked into the briefing room, the original team was there. They were accompanied by Landry, O'Neill, and Richard Woolsey. Mackenzie gave them a nod and sat down. Okay, we all know what we are here for, and we all know the plan that Colonel Vale's crew has put forward. He paused. So, thoughts? Well, for the record, O'Neill said, this has to be craziest plan we have ever had, because we don't have enough people to make this plan fly. There was moans at that unintended pun, which means that we're going to have to trust REPLICATORS to make this work. There's that, Grankin said. But they did sort of do this whole unofficial coup d'etat against the Senate, just keep our people there. And are we really going to sit on our hands and let millions of people die? Vale added. Besides, we are millions of light years away. It's not like we can stop them by saying no. Would you accept no if you were out there? There was a moment of silence, which Mackenzie broke. So, he said, we are doing this. But if we pull this off, we're going to need a long-term game plan. Can we use the beta site to dial Spira and establish a supply line? No, Anders said. Major Haley is working to override the normal 9th chevron dial-in sequence, but her program will only work once. After that, the safety protocols will adapt and lock it out. She bit his lower lip. And the new Asuran version will have the same problem, but... Han took over. If we can make a deal with new Asurans and get them to send their program to us, we can dial Spira once. Based on how the power source held up the first time, we should be able to send 12 people. Which is enough to send a 6-member medical team and send 6 new security personnel. You do realize we'd actually have to give them something, O'Neill said. I understand your objections, General, Mackenzie said. But our alliance with the new Asuran is a fait accompli, and like Mr. Vale pointed out, saying no is not really an option. So what could we give them? Seeds and animals, Woolsey said, making everybody look at him. According to the reports, the ecosystems on the new Asuran planets are rather simple. We could give them the means to do something about that. Yeah, I don't get that, O'Neill said. The Asurans do not need food or air, so why bother with the whole terraforming thing? True, but the Nakai and Orsini do, Han said. And remember, they want to emulate the ancients, so terraforming the planets makes sense to them. They probably see the whole thing as a science experiment, and their grand goal is probably to ascend, which means that their cities would be left behind. And whoever resettles the cities would probably need air, Mackenzie said. General Landry, your thoughts? I agree with Jack, Landry began. This is a crazy plan, but as crazy as this plan is, it's nowhere near as crazy as leaving Colonel Telford Team and Young's crew behind. Mackenzie nodded and leaned back. He thought that the General's assessment was right on the money, and like he had told O'Neill, their alliance with the new Asurans was a fait accompli. So the rest of the IOA could yell and scream until they were blue in the face, but this plan was happening. Planet 7 Field 29 December 2016, 0807. It had taken several weeks to set up the plan, which they had codenamed Operation Big Move. They had wanted more time to plan the whole thing, but the new Asurans had learned that the home space Nakai were launching their attack today. It would take the assault fleet 3 weeks to reach the first planet. The new Asurans were still gathering their crews, but the Nova Roma expedition was ready to go. If they could get the first city moving, the home space fleet would have to travel to the next target. That trip would give the new Asurans time to finish getting their crews together. At the moment, however, the expedition team was gathered on the field with the Stargate. The puddle jumpers and the supplies had already been sent ahead by the new Asurans. And that was not the only thing. They had managed to heal Hetty McConnell's leg and then brought Xander Henderson out of his coma. It had taken Henderson time to get back into shape, but now he was back at work. The only people who were not around were the 3 shell-shocked expedition members. Despite objections from several IOA officials, the alliance between Earth and the new Asurans was now official. The new Asuran treaty had been signed 3 days ago. As part of the treaty, it had been decided to send the shell-shocked members back to Earth. Beyond this, they had also managed to make the deal for the new Asuran dial-in program. The program had already been sent back to Atlantis, who would then send it back to Earth. Getting the seeds and animals to the new Asurans, however, was a bit more complicated. The new Asurans would get 19 military backpacks full of seeds, insects, and blood samples of larger species. There were 18 new Asuran worlds now, but once the Nakai and Ursini arrived, they intended to colonize and terraform a new planet. Hence, they had asked for 19 packs. Using the beta site power source to dial the Hope Galaxy had required a major recalibration. Finally, Earth had wanted to establish an outpost in New Asuran space and use it to establish a supply line and serve as a fallback point. Officially, the New Asurans had refused this. But off the record, President Mackenzie suspected that they wanted to know the condition of Spira first. Then they would attempt to renegotiate the outpost. But to Vale, that could wait. Right now, he had a colony to save, and he had received a wave of reinforcements. The military backpacks had been carried by 19 new expedition members. 7 of them had been the new medical team, which consisted of 6 nurses and 1 doctor, who was the team leader. Dr. Alexander Bennett had been on staff at Stargate Command for several years. There, he had gotten pretty good at reattaching severed limbs. Then 3 years ago, he had been promoted to Chief Medical Officer at the Gamma site. General O'Neill had handpicked him for the mission. The next 6 members of the reinforcements had been security personnel. With their arrival, both Teldy and Grogan had a security team under their command again. Completing the reinforcements were 6 scientists. Added to survivors of the original expedition, this meant that there were now 49 people in the team. Vale was in the front, with Bennett next to him. Bennett was a Caucasian Brit, with green eyes and short red hair. "Nervous, Doc," Vale said. "A bit," Bennett began. "I only went off-world 3 times, once at the SGC and twice at the Gamma site, and now I'm hopping galaxies." "I know it's a huge change, Doc, but if we thought you couldn't handle it, you wouldn't be here," Vale said, getting him a nod from Alex. It was at this point that Henderson joined them. "How are you doing, Corporal?" "Good, sir," Henderson said, "but being the boss is a bit odd." "Yeah, I know how that feels." Henderson was another Brit, but he was of African descent with brown eyes and short black hair. He had succeeded Victor Layton as Chief of Maintenance. "Are we ready to dial?" "Yes, sir. The ZPM is plugged in and we have the address, so just give the word." "Do it." Henderson nodded and walked to the dial-home device. While the corporal dialed, Vale looked at his crew. They were good people, and he was proud to be their commanding officer. He was kept from further pondering by the gate connecting, so he turned back to the gate. As he approached it, he realized that this was a leap of faith. But sometimes that was part of the job as well, so he took a deep breath and stepped through. 15 close call. Colony 1 Control Room 19, January 2017, 0910. 3 weeks ago, this room had been a warehouse. Now it was a multiple-level control room. The place was a mixture of Wraith, New Asuran, Ursini, Nakai, and Tori technology. Wraith hives were grown by injecting a host with a pathogen. In order to make this work, said pathogen had been adjusted. It was something that they would have never been able to pull off without the New Asurans, who had done 90% of the work. They had combined the pathogen with a specially developed host that the crew had begun calling rabbit seeds. The first stage had taken 2 weeks to grow and had been really small. But after that, they had added the ZPMs to the mix. The growth had then gone through the roof. It had taken 6 days to finish the growth. They had spent the last couple of hours running diagnostics, with the plan being to take off at 1200. Overseeing all these preparations was Haley's job. She was being helped by Porter, Carlson, and Bennett. Aronov walked in and whistled. "Impressive." "You look exhausted," Porter said. "I am." He leaned on one of the consoles. "I have been working overtime getting to know the Ursini and the Nakai. The new Asurans provided us with a translator, but their files on the culture of these two races were minimal. I have a lot of catching up to do. So, what are they like? Bennett asked. Friendly, very alien but friendly, Aronov said. So they drafted you into this as well, Doctor. Well, Wraith technology is organic. It made sense, Bennett began. Besides, the city has a medical facility with plenty of staff. They can spare me a couple more diagnostics and we should be. His sentence was cut off by an alarm. Okay, that does not sound good. It's the fleet. They're at the edge of long-range sensors, Coulson said. At their current speed, we have 6 minutes before they reach us. The screen in front of Coulson showed a starfield with a lot of red dots, which represented the Nakai ships. Coulson figured that there were at least 20 motherships, and there are a lot of them. Skip the rest of the diagnostics, Haley said. We're taking off now. Nikita, take a seat and power up that console. Aronov sat down and activated his console, which turned out to be the weapons station. The dome had come with several particle weapons to come being with, and the growth had included 4 upgraded Wraith guns. Finally, the new Asurans had sent along 60 ancient drones and the supplies to create a makeshift control chair. The chair was sitting on a small level above the area where Haley and company were manning the consoles. Diagnostics have been skipped, Coulson said. Sounding action stations now. An alarm began blaring, but Coulson quickly turned it off, starting takeoff sequence. Let me guess, the bad guys showed up early, Vale said as he bolted into the room. Yeah, Haley said. I know it's a cliché, but what can you do? We're charging the weapons and the hyperdrive now. How long until we can jump? 11 minutes, Porter said. But the Nakai can open fire in 5. The good news is that we should be able to return the favor. The bad news that if they score 1 hit to the hyperdrive, will be target practice for them. What about the sublights? Vale said. 2 minutes and counting down, Porter said. Good, Vale said as he ran up the stair to the control chair. Let's see how much they like it if we give them a run for their money. You do realize that of all the people here, you put an archaeologist behind the weapons, Aronov said. That's like putting a counselor behind the helm. Nikita, shut up and shoot, Haley said. Vale sat down in the control chair and activated it. He brought up a display with the sublight systems. As the minutes ticked away, all the indicators turned green. After the last did so, he fired up all the sublight drives at full power. The city rattled and everybody grabbed hold of something. At this point, all the stations in the control room were manned, and not only by humans. The crew was a mix of all 3 races. The Nakai were only 1 minute away when the city cleared the atmosphere. Vale took the city away from the planet. 30 seconds to weapons range, Porter said. Weapons charged to full, Aronov said, which was followed by a beep. They're in range of the drones. Vale fired a wave of drones. It took out 2 of the Nakai motherships before they could launch their fighters. As they exploded, there was another beep, indicating that the ships were now in range of the rest of the weapons. Aronov opened fire with all the weapons the city had. It took out another mothership, but then the Nakai returned fire, and then they launched their fighters. Shields down 10%, Coulson said. 5 minutes until we can go to hyperspace. Vale knew that there was no way they could win a straight-up slugging match with the fleet. There were simply too many of them. But he had a plan. The system only had 2 planets, but it had plenty of asteroids. They were located in a belt between the planets. Despite what many science fiction movies claimed, there were huge holes between the asteroids. And normally, you would not even notice that you were passing through one, but Vale not heading there to play cat and mouse. Incoming fighters, Porter said. I see them, Aronov said. He fired the weapons again, while Vale unleashed another wave of drones. 6 of the incoming fighters went up, and Aronov took out another 8, but there were still plenty of them coming. Suddenly, however, there was another wave of fire. Ironically, the colony had 2 ships to defend itself from attackers. Vale had ordered them to hide themselves behind one of the asteroids. He had drawn the fleet to the belt so that they could join the fight. If they had been in orbit when the fleet arrived, they would have been blasted to piece by the first salvo. Besides the Nakai ships, there were also 6 Ursini ships. The home space fleet tried to fire at the friendly Nakai ships, but hit the asteroid instead, which was why Vale had ordered them to hide there. The colonist ships threw their fighters at the enemy ships. Said fighters made kamikaze runs at the enemy. What the enemy did not know, but Vale did, was that the ships were on autopilot. The fighters took out dozens of their home space counterparts and one of the motherships. They were followed by the Ursini ships, which were also on autopilot. The Ursini, their ships managed to take out 2 more ships, but the fighters kept coming. "Shields down to 72%, Coulson said. "I can't shoot them all down," Aronov said. Vale unleashed all the remaining drones, taking out a whole bundle of fighters. He ran down the stairs and made his way towards one of the consoles against the outer wall of the room. It was being manned by an Ursini called Tizalo. That was not his real name, but translating Ursini and Nakai names was practically impossible. And they understood that. Tizalo, engage the teleporter. "Yes, sir." The 2 friendly ships were carrying skeleton crews. It had come as a surprise that the Ursini had teleporters, but Vale had not complained. As soon as the 2 ships were empty, their self-destruct systems triggered. The explosions did not do any damage, but they did send out 2 massive waves of electromagnetic energy. Any fighter touched by those waves lost power. Aronov made quick work of them. "Time," Vale said. 2 minutes, Haley said. The home space fleet fired again. With the control chair offline, the job of flying the city had fallen to Haley. She managed to dodge some of the incoming fire, but plenty of the enemy shots still hit. "Shields down to 55% power," Coulson said. "They're targeting." Before he could finish his sentence, a fleet of alien spaceships dropped out hyperspace. They were unlike any ships they had ever seen before. The ships were oval shape and roughly the same size as a Goa'uld Haddock-class mothership. Aronov counted 8 of them. They opened fire on the home space fleet, while forming a barrier between them and the city ship. "Didn't this happen last time?" Porter said. "Aliens riding to the rescue." "Who cares?" Vale said. "Haley, get us out of here." Aronov maintained fire, taking out more fighters and putting a couple of holes in one of the motherships. At the same time, the newcomers were also putting down heavy fire. They took out fighters and destroyed 4 motherships. Then they jumped into hyperspace. The home space fleet moved towards the city ship, but it was already too late. A beep announced that their time was up. "Hyperdrive is ready," Coulson said. "Go," Vale said. "Jump this puppy." The city ship opened a hyperspace window and entered it. 2 of the Nakai ships tried to follow, but the city ship was many times faster. It quickly pulled out of their sensor range. The moment they did, Haley dropped the city out of hyperspace. She used the thrusters to turn it, and then took it back into hyperspace. "So, what just happened?" Vale said. "I think I have part of the answer," Aronov said. "Look at this." He brought an image of one of the alien ships up on his screen, then he zoomed in on a section of the hull. It showed alien writing. "That is the same writing we found on the desert moon, and this," he pointed to a larger symbol, "appears to be some kind of logo." "That is the seal of the Jainako Empire," Tizalo said. "You've heard of this race," Vale said, "and you did not say." "Nobody asked, so I presumed you knew," Tizalo said. "Sorry, neither we or the Nakai colonists know much about them. We do know that they rule about a quarter of the galaxy containing home space, which is the rest of the galaxy. Relations between the Nakai and the Jainako are tense." The Nakai have superior numbers, but the Jinako have better technology. And thus there is a balance. Preventing open warfare, Porter said. But out here, where the ships cannot easily report back, they can strike, Vale said. And when the ships fail to return, who will get the blame? We. It serves the Empire's purposes if the home space Nakai lose this war of attrition. Vale scratched his face. Because, if the Nakai lose, they will have to spend resources on resettling those worlds, thus reducing the Nakai's numbers. It is believed by some of the colonists that the reason the Nakai are obsessed with the destroyer is the Empire, Tizalo said. They want the secrets and knowledge of the Des, tiny so that they can advance their technology and wipe out the Empire. Vale leaned against one of the consoles. One of the things he'd learned after coming out of stasis was how to play chess. He and Coulson had played many a game during his time at the beta site, and so had he and Haley, while he and Aronov had played lots of checkers and poker. Finally, his father had taught him a lot of games as well, and that was not even counting his official strategic training. He had a feeling that he would need all of that knowledge for them to survive this game. Colony 1 Control Room 19, January 2017, 1200. Things had calmed down and the control room was running on a skeleton crew. In the central area, that was just Coulson and Tizalo. Before he had found out about the Stargate program, Coulson had considered aliens the thing of science fiction. But now, here he was. Having gone from businessman and engineer to crew member on alien starship, which was on its way to rescue a group of people who were stranded on another alien starship, and he was crewing it along with an alien to boot. When they had arrived, he had thought that the plan would be really complicated. Fortunately, they had quickly learned that the colonies were not just domes, they were enclosed modules. It turned out that the Nakai had designed these colonies so that they could be moved. But the domes were not fitted with engines, they needed to be towed by a mothership. The modules were also not airtight, but the refit had taken care of all that. He leaned on the console and sighed. "What is bothering you, Mr. Coulson?" Tizalo said. "I am thinking about this mission," Coulson began, "and how it has already changed the universe. Dr. Aronov told me about destiny and its mission, and what it is about." Tizalo sat next to Coulson. "How decoding the message she is chasing would change the universe, but I think you are right. Thinking it works like that is short-sighted. The mission itself is changing existence already. It has saved us from the home space Nakai." "What did you do before we came?" "Me," Tizalo looked at him. "I was an engineer. My grandfather was on the team that created our gate remote. It is a big, heavy machine, so we put together a team to invent an improved version. I got lucky and was made team leader. Is it true that you are an engineer as well?" "Yes," Coulson said. "What happened to that project?" "It was put on hold when we found out about the Nakai threat." "Well, we have several months to pass," Coulson said, "and we have technology from 5 races to work with. How would you feel about asking permission to get back to work?" "I think that is an excellent idea." Coulson and Tizalo continued to talk, with neither of them being aware that Vale was watching them. Vale was well aware that their trip would be long. The hyperdrive they had grown was not as efficient as the ancient hyperdrive that had driven Nova Roma. It would take them roughly 7 months to reach Colony 82, and in that time, they would have to share the city with the Nakai and the Ursini. Coulson and Tizalo were not the only ones developing contact. Aronov was talking to plenty of the locals. And Haley and Porter were often seen together with alien scientists. By the time they arrived at the planet, the expedition would be integrated into the society of the city. "Saying goodbye will not be easy," a female voice said. Vale turned to see Governor Karasa standing behind him. Karasa was a female Nakai who was the leader of Colony 1. After Yorick had explained about the threat they were facing, she had given Vale command of all the military personnel in the city, meaning human, Ursini, and Nakai. The colonel had taken an instant liking to the governor. She was not the kind to pull punches. Yeah, I was thinking about that, Vale said. And the fact that we are short on personnel. He paused. There are 49 of us now. Let's presume that we managed to rescue Colonel Telford's team and get 12 people from Earth. That's 27 people. So, best case scenario, we have 76 people. Why do I have a feeling there is more to it? Who are we to take destiny for ourselves? What give us the right to monopolize that ship? He paused. Rush said that we can make things better if we finish Destiny's mission, but who decides what is better? Who are we to play God? He looked at Karasa. I have studied enough of history to know that it never ends well. I am surprised to hear you be so philosophical. From what Nikita told me, the Roman Empire expected its soldiers to follow orders without question. The Roman Empire was not born to my mother, Vale said. She drilled a lot of things into her children, some that father did not agree with, but she refused to yield and did it anyway, no matter how much father yelled at her. I like her, she paused. And you are right to ask these questions. Perhaps the power of destiny is too much for one race to handle. The fact that you have the wisdom to ask these questions give me hope, but what of your superiors? From what Nikita said, neither the military or the civilians have much faith in this. Iowa. Vale nodded. Yeah, I am going to have to ask some serious questions and have some serious conversations. But first, I have to do some thinking about who to direct those questions and conversations to. I'll be in my room. Vale walked away, leaving Karasa to watch Tizalo and Carlson. She was no expert on Earth politics, but she knew that some things were universal, and she had a feeling that Vale's superiors would not like his questions. 16 Spira at last. Stargate Command Daniel Jackson's office, 3 July 2017, 23:10. Daniel Jackson was exhausted. He had just been on a mission to P2G 192, which had included a very long negotiation. The locals had been divided between 3 countries. It had been his job to oversee a fusion of the 3 nations, but that had been easier said than done. Now, he was finally writing his report on the outcome. The treaty was signed and fusion was complete. Suddenly, a knock made him look up. It was President Mackenzie who walked into his office. I heard your mission to P2G 192 was a success, Dr. Jackson. Yes, sir. I am working on the final report now. It can wait. Mackenzie grabbed a stool and sat across Jackson. I need your opinion about something, Doctor. He reached into his pocket and took out a piece of paper. I got a letter from Lieutenant Colonel Vale. He wants permission to recruit Nakai, Ursini, and New Asuran volunteers into his crew. My first instinct is to turn down his request, but, he leaned on Jackson's desk. Vale asked some very good questions. No offense, sir, but isn't that what we pay him for? True, Mackenzie said with a smile, but that doesn't change the fact that I want your opinion. Mackenzie gave Jackson the letter. He opened it and read it, and Vale had indeed asked some very good questions. It reminded Jackson of an argument he had once had with then-Colonel O'Neill. SG-1 had been off-world on a mission to a place called Euronda. Daniel had asked some hard questions, which O'Neill had not wanted to hear. But in the end, O'Neill had changed his mind and told him to ask his questions. The answers had not been pretty, but they had kept Stargate Command from supporting the wrong side in a war. It had turned out that the people they had considered helping were basically fascists. He finished reading the letter, then put it down. Well, I didn't know if we are worthy of controlling destiny, Jackson began. But I do know that there are people aboard that ship who will die if we don't rescue them, and that we can't let the Nakai or the Lucian Alliance have it. If either of them get it, they will use its secrets to massacre millions. Yeah, there's that. As for monopolizing destiny as a race, he leaned back and looked at Mackenzie. I know the people aboard Destiny have had issues with both the Ursini and the Nakai in the past, but if these people were going to stab us in the back, they would have done it by now. Haley finished the dial-in program a week ago. and they know how to fly the city by now, they would have killed our people and taken the city for themselves." Jackson paused. "And the new Assurans have been holding up their end of the deal as well. They signed a treaty with us when they didn't have to." "Anything else?" "Well, we have to remember that we have no idea what exactly is at the end of the line," Jackson said. "We have no idea what the message that Destiny is trying to decrypt is. We also need to remember that there is a difference between monopolizing Destiny and monopolizing the good that can come from Destiny." Mackenzie nodded. He realized that there was a major difference between the two, and that the second was a much more important issue than the first. The first was also much easier to fix than the second, which was exactly what Colonel Vale was asking permission to do. He realized that his first reaction was how the IOA would have reacted. Mackenzie cursed himself, then nodded for Jackson to continue. "Finally, we have a problem. Even if we manage to convince the new Assuran to let us build an outpost on a planet in the Hope Galaxy, setting up a supply line will not be easy. The original plan to dial in with the reprogramming subroutine did not work. And we both know that we can only dial Spira twice. This might be our only chance to increase the number of people aboard Spira. And until Vale gets his people aboard Destiny, we can't use the beta site to dial the 9th chevron." "Good point," Mackenzie said. "Now I am going to talk to General Landry, and you should get to bed." He smiled at Jackson. "P2G 192 might be a pain in the ass, but it won't end if turn in that report tomorrow." "I'm not so sure about that, sir," Jackson said. "Bed now." And with that, Mackenzie walked out. Jackson tried to continue working on the report, but a yawn made him realize that Mackenzie was right. So he saved the file, turned off his computer, and went to find a bed. Colony 1 Control Room, 25 August 2017, 0711. They were approaching Colony 82, and there was plenty of good news to go around. All the cities had escaped from the home space Nakai. Furthermore, they had managed to thin out the fleet to 5 motherships and a handful of fighters. And in the end, those ships had been forced to turn around. At the same time, President Mackenzie, along with the team of IOA representatives and several other heads of state, had given him permission to go ahead with recruiting volunteers from their alien allies. Finally, Dr. Jackson had managed to bypass the problem with the new Assurans not wanting them to set up an outpost on one of their planets. Instead, they had asked the Ursini and colonists to create an outpost on their world, and they had agreed. Vale was glad to hear that piece of good news. But he wondered what good the outpost would do, so he leaned against the engineering console and asked Coulson. Well, Elle looked at the logs of the 9th chevron dial-in, and it's a miracle the whole complex didn't explode when Colonel Telford and his team went through. He looked at Vale. The folks back home have been working on it since we left. They have made a lot of upgrades on the place already. But if there is one thing we have learned during this mission, Plan A rarely works. Yeah, there's that. So, Plan B is to use the beta site to dial the outpost, and then dial Destiny from there. Yeah, you did remind them that this whole software override thing doesn't work, Vale said. We'll be lucky if we can get aboard Spira and get one wave of reinforcements. Yes, they said they were working on that. Before they could continue their conversation, a loud and very annoying klaxon sounded. Coulson killed it, while Vale ran to the control chair. As he sat down, Coulson announced that they were 2 minutes from dropping out of hyperspace. Vale activated the chair. Then he waited for the clock to hit 0. The moment it did, he dropped the city out. Then he left the chair and ran down the stairs. Haley and Tizalo were now flying the city. Right on course, Tizalo said. Excellent. He turned to Porter, who was monitoring the sensors. Allison, what do we have on the long-range units? Checking. She worked her console. A cluster of dots appeared on her display along with a circle. Inside the circle was another dot. 1 planet with a colony on it and 80 city ships in orbit. She hit several more keys and the display zoomed in. Everybody is here, and there are 0 hostiles on scanners. Life signs and ZPM count, please. 0 life signs and 0 ZPMs in orbit. 1 ZPM and 32 life signs down on the planet. 31 volunteers, Vale asked. The last life sign belonged to a technician who had stayed behind to help with the evacuation of Colony 1 to the Hope Galaxy. Plus another 10 from this colony, Karasa said as she walked into the control room. 6 Ursini and 4 Nakai, including Mr. Tizalo. She turned to Tizalo. Mr. Tizalo, front and center. Tizalo swallowed and left his console. I am happy to announce that, by order of the ruling Council of Governors of the Nakai Ursini Alliance, you have been granted the rank of Senior Master Sergeant in the fleet. And with that, she put 2 small, golden discs on his shoulders. Now, land this city, Sergeant. You heard the lady, Vale said. Sarge. Yes, sir. Tizalo took his seat and set to landing the city. Vale smiled and watched as they approached the planet. The integration of his crew has just begun in earnest. But for now, they had other things to worry about. Colony 82 Control Room, 25 August 2017, 16:05. The control room of this colony was different from the one back on Colony 1. There was no control chair, and the flight control console was much simpler. This was because she only had to fly on autopilot during the mission. The control room also housed a Pegasus model Stargate. This was the gate the other colonies had used to evacuate to the Hope Galaxy. At the moment, the people of Colony 1 were moving through it. The gate was powered by the last ZPM, and all the Power City ships could muster. Colony 1 and Colony 82 were wired in the old-fashioned way, while the city ships in orbit transmitted power down. Haley, Grogan, and Coulson were overseeing the evacuation. Is this the last group? Vale said. Yes, sir, Grogan said. We're the only ones left. The last colonists stepped through the gate. 5 seconds later, they received a signal from the other side, which indicated that everybody had made it. Coulson cut the power and the gate disengaged. Vale turned and gestured towards the door. The 4 of them made their way to a room they were using as a staging area. It had been a mess hall before they had commandeered it, so it was big. Despite taking as much as they could, they had lost a lot of gear when they had evacuated Nova Roma. But then they had picked up some stuff in the Hope Galaxy. And now, the expedition was taking what they could from Colony 82, so they were actually pretty well supplied and stocked. I still think it's weird, Grogan said. It makes sense to me, Coulson said. What? We're one crew now. The expedition now consisted of 49 humans or Tori, as the aliens' members had begun calling them 10 Nakai, 17 New Asurans, and 14 Ursini. But it was a little bit harder to tell them apart now, because it had been decided that everybody would now wear the Icarus base uniform. Well, sort of. The only difference was that the Icarus base patch had been replaced by a Nova Roma patch. The patch was a blue circle with a silver sword. Around this was a red border with black letters. The bottom half had the person's name and rank. In case of the civilians, the rank was replaced by either the title or position. The top half said, Nova Roma Expedition Earth/Hope Galaxy Alliance. Making the uniforms for the Ursini and Nakai had not been easy. The sizes had to altered, but they had succeeded. The room was a beehive of activity, and making oneself heard would not be easy. So Vale put his fingers in his mouth and whistled. Everybody stopped what they were doing and looked at him. Okay, people, I know it's been a long and difficult road, he began. And I know that we're not there yet, but this is it. The colonies are empty, the autopilots have been programmed. The ZPMs have been planted by the defense ships assigned to this colony. This had happened while they had still been en route, and we are about try and dial Spira. If the gate failed to connect, they would join the others in the Hope Galaxy and dial back to Earth from there. You all know what it means if you board that ship, and the price that this expedition might ask of its members. So I am giving you all one last to withdraw your anticipation. This was the point of no return. Once you were on that ship, your chances of seeing home your friends, your family ever again were slim, and everybody knew it, so he was giving them the option to change their minds, but all he got in reply was silence, so he nodded. Tilde make or break time, tilde. Okay, let's do this. The expedition team, 80 strong, began moving into the control room. Haley went to the flight control console and typed in a code. There was a beep as the computer acknowledged the command and a countdown began. In 1 hour, the autopilot would engage and fly both Colony 1 and Colony 82 in orbit, where they would join the other ships. And 5 minutes after that, the fleet would leave for Galaxy Destiny 2 to do their part against the Berserker drones. Next, she keyed in another code and waited. There was another beep and another countdown started. This one began at 15 minutes. When it hit 0, the first ZPM would overload. The rest would detonate at 1-minute intervals after that. Finally, she moved over to the engineering console. She put several commands and there was a beep. That done, she turned to Vale. Countdowns engaged, sir, Haley began. Override program activate. Good, Vale said. Vale walked to the DHD and began dialing. As he did so, Porter used a remote to line up a MALP. They had cobbled it together from parts they had found around Colony 1. The final chevron locked and the wormhole formed. He nodded to Porter, who then drove the MALP through. One of the consoles lit up with readings and a video feed from a camera on the MALP. Aronov looked at the readings. The air reads as breathable and pressure is stable. I can't see any hull breaches on the video feed. He hit some keys. I recommend we check the air scrubbers as soon as we get there, though, and power is low, so we'll have to address that as well. Radiation levels. Minimal, Aronov said. We have a go. Vale nodded and stepped through the gate. The MALP was right next to the Stargate. He took a spare remote from the MALP and drove it towards the hull. This remote had a small screen so that he could get used to inspect the hull closer. As he did so, confirming Aronov's initial assessment, the rest of the team came through the gate. Finally, the puddle jumpers came through. Then the wormhole disengaged, and after all that had happened, they were on their way to Destiny at last. To be continued.